Welcome to Computer Retro Bus. Got a fun episode today. We are looking at the history of hardware, lies, treachery, and the simple dark arts that they performed into tricking us to buying their hardware. This is a subject that I absolutely love because it's so interesting. The lengths that these guys will go to, the lying, the cheating, the shortcuts. It's absolutely fascinating. So stick around for my top 5 moments in PC hardware scandals. So let's start our story in the mid-90s. And you know what? If you want a villain origin story for dodgy PC hardware, look no further than PCChips. In the mid-90s, they were shipping motherboards proudly advertising onboard level 2 cache, complete with rows of official-looking chips soldered right there onto the motherboard. Cache, or cache, however you want to call it, is an ultra-fast type of memory that sits between the CPU and the main RAM, storing frequently used data so the processor can access it much quicker. It is essential for fast processor performance. There was just one small problem. Those chips were not real, and they were doing nothing at all. No connection, no function. Just plastic props on the motherboard for appearances. They were so dodgy they even made the BIOS actually report that the cache was there. Can you believe it? But the performance was clearly lacking, so people started poking around, running tests, and in the end, someone pulled the chips off, and guess what? Nothing changed. That BIOS still reported the cache there. It was a masterclass in illusion. Graphics hardware is notorious in this space, so you're going to see them feature quite a bit. One of the early efforts was by ATI. And here it is, the ATI Rage Pro Turbo AGP. While PCChips was faking hardware, ATI took a bit more of an elegant solution. They created these turbo drivers, which promised outstanding performance, but I wonder how. The interesting thing was the card itself was a bit of a fraud. It was just a simple Rage Pro. They just added the turbo on the end to pretend that it was actually a new chip. It wasn't, and they released it at the same time as the drivers to say Rage Pro Turbo. So as mentioned, the Rage Pro Turbo was essentially just a rebranded Rage Pro, paired with revised driver code that identified benchmarks were running and applied optimizations that didn't apply to games. ATI even launched a PR campaign claiming up to 40% performance increase, which definitely was not true in real 3D gaming scenarios. It basically cheated on Ziff-Davis 3D WinBench and Final Reality benchmarks by using highly optimized drivers designed specifically to inflate benchmark scores. While these turbo drivers significantly boosted performance in those synthetic tests, actual game performance often stayed the same or even actually got worse, even dropping by up to 25% as seen in games like Incoming. And just when you thought the industry couldn't get even more chaotic, things started to explode, literally. Now this would affect the graphics cards and the motherboards. Enter the Capacitor Plague. It was a slow-motion disaster that took down thousands of PCs from the inside out. In the early 2000s, a wave of faulty electrolytic capacitors flooded the market, used by major motherboard manufacturers like A-Bit, MSI, and ASUS. The root cause, an industrial espionage story that almost sounds too ridiculous to be real. It was a botched act of corporate espionage. In 2001, a group of scientists working for the Japanese company Rubicon left, taking the secret water-based electrolyte capacitor formula with them. So, they cruised across the East China Sea and set up a rival operation in Taiwan. Only problem was, they didn't realize the secret formula was incomplete, missing key stabilizing components. But they sold them a hell of a lot cheaper, so the industry bought them by the truckload. Systems became unstable, random crashes turned into dead boards, and the entire product lines were quietly doomed from day one. We all started seeing the signs: dome tops and brown crust. In 2005, this reportedly cost Dell $300 million in replacing motherboards and managing the fallout from this disaster, and unfortunately their brand reputation took quite a hit. And just like the benchmark scandals, it wasn't immediately obvious, until suddenly it was everywhere. This wasn't about faking performance anymore. This was hardware that looked fine, worked fine, and then slowly destroyed itself. The worst part of it was, even if you didn't use it, the capacitor still failed. I've got some new old stock motherboards and they still fail. It's just the chemical reaction over time. There's no escaping it. In the early 2000s, ATI and NVIDIA were fighting for graphics supremacy. And one of the gold standards, benchmarks used everywhere on magazines, websites, was Quake 3 Arena. The numbers that this game got mattered, and they knew it. And this, my friends, is where the Quack 3 scandal comes in. The Quack benchmark scandal was a famous hardware cheating incident in 2001 involving ATI and the game Quake 3 Arena. ATI's drivers were caught detecting the game's executable and acting accordingly to boost the frame rates. As soon as the drivers detected that Quake 3 was running, it overrode all the user settings and lowered the texture quality and bitmap settings, with the result giving you better frame rates. It was the perfect illusion till some pesky kid over at Hard OCP renamed the executable to Quack 3 and ran it then. Well, since the driver no longer recognized the file name, the illusion was shattered and we saw the real frame rates. The trick was exposed in the most embarrassingly simple way possible. It was blatant and it proved just how far these companies were willing to go. ATI of course claimed they were simply optimizing for game engines. Now this would become a standard excuse in the graphics industry, but they eventually released an updated driver that removed this hack. In 2003, NVIDIA released this, GeForce FX. A major disappointment. They tried a new architecture that just did not work. Unfortunately for them, ATI released a highly successful 9000 series, which was absolutely trouncing them. So they were desperate. Desperate times call for desperate measures. So what do? Well, this is what they did do. They took a leaf out of ATI's book and just went hard after 3DMark 03. They released the Detonator FX Drivers that promised to turn water into wine and deliver amazing performance. Hell, the evidence is still on their website even today. 30% increase. What did it really do? Yeah, it basically detected when 3DMark 03 was running and started performing its dark arts. But this time it wasn't a game, this was a benchmark, and what followed was one of the biggest scandals in GPU history. The driver specifically recognized when the benchmark was running and switched to a special lower quality rendering mode that was faster and gave it a significantly better score. And it worked. Well, until FutureMark stepped in and updated the benchmark to block the trickery. After that update, well, overnight NVIDIA's scores dropped dramatically by 24%, while ATI's barely moved. And how did NVIDIA respond? Well, you guessed it, the standard. They were simply driver optimizations intended to boost performance. So there you have it. It's amazing what these PC hardware manufacturers could get away with, especially in the early 90s, 80s. We just didn't have the access to information that we have today. Any hardware that's built, there's lots of reviews online, you get access to information, and when something is found, the news spreads fast. But back then, you didn't have that. You could only rely on your friends, maybe the place that was selling the computer to know. Otherwise, you just wouldn't know what was going on. I'm sure many people still to this day probably don't realize that they had a motherboard with fake cache on it. And there's still many more. I've run across all sorts of stuff and I'm still learning new stuff. I got a motherboard recently that's got a fake AGP slot on it. It really was the Wild West. But as consumers, we all got smarter and wiser as well, once bitten, twice shy. And due to all these scandals, it really has shaped the industry, but also shaped us as consumers. I think we're much more weary now, but it is so fun and fascinating to see what they tried to get away with. So as I mentioned in the comments, these are the top 5 scandals and probably the most famous ones that I experienced. Hit me up in the comments, tell me about other scandals that I may have missed or your favorite ones that you experienced. So I hope you had fun watching this video. I had a lot of fun making it. I love looking back at this sort of stuff. It's very interesting for me. If you'd like to support my channel, you can buy me a coffee. Thank you for everybody that does, or you can also support me on Patreon. Links are in the description. If you like this video, please like and subscribe. I'm trying to grow this channel. I'm about 6 months in so far and having a great time. So thank you again for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye-bye.